The sun hung high in the sky, casting a harsh golden light over the endless desert. The air shimmered with heat, and the wind carried a dry, dusty taste that clung to the cowboy's throat. He adjusted the brim of his worn hat and squinted ahead, scanning the horizon. For days, he had been riding alone, following trails that were barely visible, searching for water, shelter, or any sign of life. The desert was beautiful in a cruel way, full of strange rocks, shifting sand, and endless blue skies, but it could turn deadly in moments. Even a single misstep, a wrong turn, or the simple failure to find water could mean the end. He had grown used to solitude, the way the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, making every sound louder than it should be. The wind whistled through the sparse cacti and tumbleweeds, and sometimes he thought he heard whispers that weren't really there. His horse moved steadily, hooves kicking up little clouds of dust. The cowboy's eyes were sharp, trained to notice the slightest movement, the flick of a shadow, the flash of something unusual. It was this instinct that made him notice the figure in the distance. At first, it looked like a small mound of clothing lying in the sand. He slowed his horse and squinted harder. The figure was too still, too fragile to be anything alive, or so he thought at first. But as he got closer, he realized it was moving, barely, but enough to make his heart quicken. It was a young girl, no older than 15 or 16, crawling across the sand with every ounce of strength she had left. Her movements were slow, painful, desperate. She tried to lift herself, only to collapse back onto the scorching earth. The cowboy's first instinct was caution. He had been in dangerous situations before. There were bandits, wild animals, and the harshness of nature itself to consider. But something about this girl, her fragile frame, the desperate look in her eyes, made his chest tighten. She was alone, injured, and terrified. It wasn't just her body that seemed broken. It was as if the weight of everything she had endured pressed down on her tiny shoulders. He dismounted slowly, making sure not to startle her. The sand shifted under his boots, hot and soft, and he took careful steps toward her. The closer he got, the more he saw. Her clothes were torn and dusty, hanging in tatters over bruised and scraped skin. Dirt was smeared across her face, and streaks of dried blood traced down her arms and legs. Her hair, dark and tangled, fell over her eyes, but he could see the fear and pain even through the thin curtain of hair. She was whispering something, almost too faint to hear. The cowboy leaned closer, catching her words, and his stomach sank. "Just kill me," she murmured. The words struck him like a physical blow. He froze, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do. The desert seemed to grow even quieter around him, as if it too were holding its breath. He had seen suffering before, the aftermath of fights, the traces of violence, but there was something about this young girl, her quiet plea, that cut deeper than anything he had witnessed. He felt a mix of fear, anger, and overwhelming compassion all at once. He knelt beside her, careful not to make sudden movements. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." She looked up, her eyes wide and glassy with pain. There was a spark of fear, but also a flicker of hope. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, and every movement seemed to send a jolt of agony through her body. The cowboy's heart ached as he realized how much she had suffered and how much she must have endured alone. Slowly, he reached for the blanket he carried in his saddlebag. He had learned long ago that in situations like this, warmth and protection could mean the difference between life and death. The desert nights were bitterly cold, and even a few hours without shelter could be dangerous. He spread the blanket over her trembling shoulders, careful not to touch the bruised skin too roughly. She shivered under it, both from the cold and from pain, but she didn't pull away. The cowboy examined her as best as he could, checking for broken bones, cuts, and signs of dehydration. It was clear she had been through a terrible ordeal. Her arms and legs were bent at unnatural angles, and her face bore the marks of bruises and scratches. Her lips were dry and cracked, and her eyes, though bright, looked hollow with exhaustion. He felt a pang of helplessness. He wasn't a doctor, and the desert offered no easy answers. But he knew he couldn't leave her here. Not like this. He thought back to the stories he had heard of the Apache people and their struggles. He knew that tensions ran high between settlers and native tribes, and that violence had left deep scars on both sides. Yet here was a girl, only a child, suffering for reasons she did not deserve. That thought steeled his resolve. He had faced danger before, and he could face it again if it meant giving her a chance to live. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the desert sky with shades of orange and pink. The air cooled slightly, but the chill of approaching night brought a new urgency. He had to find shelter, water, and a way to get her help before darkness fell. His mind raced with possibilities. A nearby settlement, a hidden canyon, perhaps an abandoned cabin he remembered from earlier travels. Every step was calculated, every decision weighed against the risk to both of them. He spoke softly to the girl, trying to calm her fears. "I'm going to take care of you," he said. "We'll find water, we'll find help. You don't have to be alone anymore." Her eyes blinked slowly, and a tear slipped down her dirt-streaked cheek. She didn't speak, but the slightest nod told him she understood. That small gesture, fragile as it was, gave him a sense of purpose stronger than fear. He lifted her gently, careful not to worsen any injuries, and settled her across the saddle before him. The horse seemed to sense her fragility, moving with unusual care despite the rough terrain. The cowboy guided them along a path that would take them toward the nearest sign of life, scanning constantly for dangers. Every shadow in the sand, every rustle in the distant brush, made his senses heighten. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, heavier than any pack or saddlebag he had carried. The desert stretched endlessly, but the cowboy kept his focus on the girl, her quiet breathing, and the small signs of life that might guide them. Night was coming, but he refused to let the darkness scare him. His mind was sharp, his heart steady. He whispered encouragements to her, telling her to hold on, telling her she was stronger than she knew. She clung to those words, her trembling body leaning against him as he rode. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the cowboy felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be pain, danger, and uncertainty. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He could not leave her behind. Whatever it took, he would see her safe. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but even in that harsh landscape, compassion could survive. And so, with the fading sun at their backs, the cowboy pressed on, carrying the fragile life of the Apache girl across the endless golden sands. Determined to give her a chance at survival, even when the odds seemed impossibly stacked against them. Every step, every movement, every heartbeat was a testament to the unexpected bond forming between two souls thrown together by circumstance, yet connected by humanity. The desert night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound, every rustle of sand, every distant coyote's call, feel amplified. The cowboy adjusted the blanket around the Apache girl, trying to shield her from the chill that crept over the desert as the sun disappeared. The wind had cooled, but it still carried the grit of sand, stinging any exposed skin. He felt her shiver and realized that the cold was only part of her pain. Every movement she made seemed to cause sharp jolts of agony. He dismounted and set the horse down, letting it graze on the sparse desert vegetation. He had to find a way to make her more comfortable, at least for the night. Gently, he helped her lie down on the ground, using the blanket as cushioning against the unforgiving sand. Her eyes were half closed, weary from the long journey and the exhaustion of her injuries. He saw the small rise and fall of her chest and noted her shallow breathing. The sight made his heart ache. She was barely holding on. Carefully, he looked at her injuries again. Her arms and legs were bruised in dark purples and blues, twisted in ways that suggested broken bones. Her skin was scraped, raw, and covered in dust. He didn't know exactly how to set her bones or stop the pain fully, but he could do something. He could keep her warm, keep her hydrated, and make sure she wasn't alone. Sometimes, that was enough to make the difference between life and death in the desert. "Hang on," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He retrieved a small canteen of water from his saddlebag. She took it weakly, her fingers shaking as she held it. A few drops of water touched her lips, and her eyes brightened for the briefest moment. The cowboy watched carefully, making sure she didn't drink too quickly, knowing that her body might not handle it well after such trauma. Still, every sip was a sign that she wanted to fight for life, even if only a little. The girl's whisper was faint but clear. They came, took everything." Her voice trembled. The cowboy leaned closer, listening. He had guessed she was fleeing some kind of danger, but the way she spoke, broken and hesitant, made it clear that what she had endured was far worse than he had imagined. "Who?" he asked gently. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. The memories were too painful. He didn't push. He knew the importance of letting her tell her story in her own time. The cowboy stayed by her side through the long night. He watched the stars appear, countless pinpoints of light glittering against the dark sky, each one silent and steady, as if witnessing the fragile life lying in the sand below. He thought about the countless people who had traveled through this desert before him, about the ones who had not survived, and about the ways the world could be both cruel and beautiful at the same time. As the hours passed, the girl began to move slightly, turning her head toward him. Her eyes, though heavy with pain and fatigue, met his. In that gaze he saw fear, sorrow, and the faintest spark of trust. She whispered again, her voice barely audible over the soft desert wind. "Just don't leave me." The cowboy's chest tightened. He had no intention of leaving her. She might be afraid of him at first, but he would show her that there were still people who cared, who could protect her even in the harshest places. By the faint light of the moon, he examined her more carefully. One arm was clearly broken, and there was a deep bruise across her side that caused her to flinch with every small movement. He realized that her injuries were not only from an accident. She had been attacked. The thought filled him with anger, but he pushed it aside. For now, the only thing that mattered was her survival. The cowboy had learned long ago that in moments like this, anger could cloud judgment, but careful action and patience could save lives. He tried to make her more comfortable, shifting the blanket to cover her better, propping up her head with a small bundle of clothes from his saddlebag, and gently talking to her to distract her from the pain. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think." She listened quietly, and for a few moments, he thought he saw a small smile touch her lips, a tiny gesture, but one that meant she was still fighting. Through the night, they heard the distant sounds of the desert, wind, the soft cry of animals, the occasional rustle in the brush. The cowboy stayed alert, knowing the desert could be dangerous even at night. Predators and other threats could appear without warning. He tightened his grip on his rifle, placing it close by, ready to protect the girl if needed. At the same time, he didn't want to frighten her. She had endured enough fear already. The last thing she needed was to be reminded of danger. As the night grew deeper, he asked gentle questions, trying to piece together her story. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, closing her eyes for a long moment before whispering fragments of her ordeal. Our home, raiders. They took my family." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. The cowboy said nothing, letting her grief flow. He understood that sometimes words were not needed, sometimes presence and patience were more powerful than any advice or comfort. Hours passed slowly, but finally, as dawn approached, the girl began to relax slightly. Her breathing steadied, and she no longer whimpered with every small movement. The desert, which had seemed vast and merciless under the scorching sun, now appeared peaceful in the soft, early morning light. The cowboy had survived nights like this before, but he had never carried anyone as fragile and broken as this girl. He felt a new weight of responsibility, one that went beyond the physical. It was now a matter of guiding her toward hope, toward healing, toward life itself. The first rays of sunlight touched the sand, casting long shadows across the desert. The cowboy lifted the blanket carefully and adjusted it, making sure she was warm. "We're going to move soon," he said softly. "There's water ahead. We'll get help. You'll be okay." She nodded weakly, her small fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. It was the first sign of hope he had seen from her. A fragile, trembling sign, but hope nonetheless. He looked at her closely, studying every bruise, every cut, every mark of her suffering. He realized how lucky she was to have survived the desert and the attack. Most people would have given up long before this, and yet here she was, alive, fragile as a bird, but still fighting. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her courage. It was easy to see why she had endured so much. The will to survive burned quietly in her. The girl's voice broke the silence. "Why, are you helping me?" she asked, curiosity mingling with pain. The cowboy smiled faintly, even though he was tired and worried. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "Because no one should be left alone in the desert, hurt and scared. I don't know your story yet, but I know you deserve a chance to live." She looked at him with eyes wide and uncertain, but there was a flicker of trust there now, a bond forming that was stronger than fear. By the time the sun fully rose, the cowboy had packed up his horse and prepared to continue the journey. He helped the girl onto the saddle, supporting her as best he could. Every step was careful, every movement measured to avoid causing more pain. She held on tightly, her small hands gripping the blanket he had wrapped around her. Together they moved forward into the desert, the rising sun illuminating the vast golden landscape. The desert was quiet, but not empty. Birds began to stir, the wind shifted, and the air carried a faint scent of distant vegetation. The cowboy knew that survival depended on careful choices, choosing the right path, moving at the right pace, and keeping the girl safe. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a growing determination. He would not let her suffer alone. He would carry her through this nightmarish ordeal until she was safe. As they moved, he kept speaking to her gently, telling stories, asking her simple questions about her life before the attack. Anything to keep her mind from the pain. Sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't. He learned that patience was key. He couldn't rush her, couldn't force her to speak. Healing, even the smallest part of it, had to come at her own pace. And so, the morning passed slowly, with the cowboy guiding the girl across the desert, carrying her weight, tending to her injuries, and offering quiet words of encouragement. The desert remained vast and unforgiving, but in that moment, a fragile connection grew between the two, a bond formed from compassion, trust, and the shared struggle to survive. The girl, though broken in body and spirit, began to understand that she was not alone anymore. And the cowboy, though weary, felt a new sense of purpose, to help this small, wounded soul find her way back to safety, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The desert under the midday sun was relentless, its heat pressing down like an invisible weight. Every step the cowboy and the Apache girl took was a battle against exhaustion and the unforgiving terrain. The sand radiated heat, and the sparse vegetation offered little shade. Yet, the cowboy pressed on, determined to find water and safety for the girl. Her injuries made every movement a struggle, and he had to be careful with each step he took. One wrong motion could worsen her broken limbs or bruises, and he couldn't afford that. He adjusted her position on the saddle again, trying to make her more comfortable. Her small frame shook with pain every time the horse stumbled over uneven sand. Her eyes were closed, lips parted in shallow breaths, and she seemed almost to be drifting in and out of consciousness. The cowboy's heart ached at the sight. He whispered softly to her, though she could barely respond. "We're going to make it," he said. "Just hold on. We'll find water. We'll find help." His voice was steady, but inside he worried constantly. Traveling through the desert was exhausting even for someone in good health. For a wounded girl, it was almost impossible. Every dune they climbed, every rocky path they navigated, was a challenge. The cowboy kept glancing at her, noting every flinch, every sigh, every sign of pain. He had seen hardship before, but nothing compared to this fragile life relying entirely on him. He had to balance speed and safety, making slow progress, but ensuring that she could endure the journey. At times, the girl whimpered, small sounds that were almost swallowed by the desert wind. The cowboy slowed the horse, pausing to soothe her. "I know it hurts," he said softly, gently stroking her hair away from her face. "I wish I could make it stop. I can't take away the pain, but I can carry you through it." She nodded weakly, her eyes wet with tears. The words didn't fix her broken bones or bruised body, but they gave her a sense of comfort, a tiny thread of hope that someone cared enough to stay with her through the suffering. As they moved on, the cowboy noticed signs of danger. The desert was full of creatures and circumstances that could threaten them. Snakes slithered through the sand, and occasionally he caught glimpses of vultures circling in the sky, drawn by the scent of something lifeless or dying. He had to remain alert, scanning every shadow and every rock for potential threats. But his priority was the girl. Protecting her came before everything else. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, ready, but he spoke softly to her, so she wouldn't be frightened by the occasional sound of wildlife nearby. The girl's story began to unfold in fragments. In the quiet moments when the horse walked slowly over the sand, she whispered broken sentences about what had happened to her family. "They came at night, took everyone." Her voice trembled, and her eyes welled with tears. The cowboy listened carefully, not pressing for more than she could give. Each fragment painted a picture of loss and pain, but it also showed her courage. Even broken and hurt, she had survived on her own for days before he found her. The journey was slow. Every mile was a test of endurance, and the desert showed no mercy. The sun rose higher, burning fiercely overhead. The cowboy wiped the sweat from his brow, careful not to disturb the girl. Her small body shivered, partly from pain, partly from the heat and dehydration. He poured a few drops of water from the canteen into her mouth, watching her drink slowly, ensuring she didn't choke or overexert herself. Each sip was precious, and he knew that finding a larger water source was critical to her survival. At midday, they stopped near a small rocky outcrop that offered a bit of shade. The cowboy dismounted and helped the girl off the horse, lowering her gently to the ground. He examined her injuries again, noting the swelling and the way her limbs hung awkwardly. He realized she had more than just broken bones. She had deep bruises that could lead to infection if not treated soon. He used strips of cloth from his saddlebag to wrap her limbs gently, not enough to set the bones, but enough to give her some support and prevent further injury while they continued. During the brief rest, the girl's small voice trembled as she asked, "Will they come back?" Her eyes were wide with fear. The cowboy looked into her gaze, understanding the weight of that question. "No one is coming for you now," he said firmly. "I won't let anyone hurt you again. We'll stay together, and we'll get through this." She nodded, her trust in him growing, fragile as it was. In her eyes, he saw a flicker of relief, a glimmer of hope that she could survive this nightmare with someone by her side. As they continued, the desert shifted around them. Dunes rose and fell like waves frozen in sand, and the sun's heat seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The cowboy's muscles ached, and sweat ran down his back, but he didn't stop. He kept speaking softly to the girl, telling her stories of simpler times, of rivers and trees, of friendly towns he had known. The words were small comforts, but they helped her focus on something other than her pain, something beyond the endless desert and the memories of her suffering. The desert was full of surprises, both beautiful and dangerous. Small flowers bloomed in unlikely places, and the colors of the sand shifted with the sun's angle, painting the world in shades of gold, red, and orange. Occasionally, a breeze would stir, carrying a faint scent of distant water or vegetation. Each of these signs lifted their spirits slightly, reminders that life existed even in this harsh landscape. The cowboy took note of every subtle cue, knowing that finding water and shelter could be the difference between life and death. Night approached once again, bringing with it a chill that cut through the heat of the day. The cowboy found a small depression in the sand, providing a bit of shelter from the wind. He helped the girl down carefully, arranging the blanket around her once more. She shivered, and he held her gently, speaking softly to reassure her. "We'll make it through the night," he said. "I'll stay right here. You're not alone." Her eyes closed, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the first brief respite she had found since the attack. Throughout the night, the cowboy remained vigilant. He listened for sounds of animals, for movements in the sand, and for anything that might threaten the girl's safety. He stayed close, keeping the blanket tucked around her, and whispered words of encouragement whenever she stirred. He realized that his presence was as important as the physical care he could give. In the desert, alone and injured, she had learned that fear could overwhelm, but companionship could give courage and hope. By dawn, the girl's small frame had rested, and her breathing was steadier. The cowboy gently helped her back onto the horse, ready to continue the journey. He scanned the horizon, noting landmarks and possible sources of water. His experience told him that survival depended on careful planning, patience, and alertness. Every decision mattered, and he had to move slowly, ensuring the girl could endure the long miles ahead. As the sun rose higher, the desert came alive with subtle sounds, the flutter of birds, the rustle of small animals, and the faint whisper of wind across the dunes. The cowboy kept moving, guiding the horse carefully, watching the girl's reactions, adjusting her position whenever necessary. The bond between them was growing, built on trust, care, and shared struggle. She no longer whispered pleas for death. Instead, she clung to the cowboy's words and presence as a fragile lifeline. They traveled through the day, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Each step a careful balance of progress and safety. The girl's endurance amazed him, her spirit intact, despite the pain that racked her small body. He marveled at her strength, realizing that survival was not just physical, but also mental and emotional. She had endured more than most people could imagine, yet she continued to fight, trusting him to guide her through the desert. As the sun began to lower in the sky, the cowboy spotted the faint glimmer of a distant oasis, a small cluster of green against the endless sand. His heart lifted, and he encouraged the girl, pointing toward the distant trees. "There," he said. "Water, shade, safety. We're almost there." Her eyes brightened slightly, and a small, weary smile touched her lips. It was the first time he had seen hope reflected so clearly in her eyes, and it gave him renewed strength to keep moving. The final miles were grueling. The horse struggled over rocky patches and shifting sand, but the cowboy's guidance kept them on track. The girl leaned weakly against him, holding on tightly as they moved. Each step brought them closer to water, closer to shelter, closer to a chance at survival. The desert, harsh and unforgiving as it was, seemed a little less oppressive with the promise of relief ahead. By nightfall, they reached the oasis. The cowboy carefully helped the girl down from the horse, leading her to the shade of the trees. He knelt beside her, offering water and letting her rest. Her breathing was steadier now, her body more relaxed, though still sore and bruised. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, knowing that the most dangerous part of the journey was behind them. Sitting beside her, he whispered gently, "We made it. You're safe now. For tonight, at least." She looked up at him, eyes full of trust and a hint of gratitude. In that moment, the bond between them was undeniable. They had faced the desert together, battled pain and exhaustion, and survived. And though the challenges were far from over, the first real step toward recovery had been taken. The oasis was a small miracle in the harsh desert, a pocket of green with a gentle stream trickling through it. The cowboy led the Apache girl to the water, helping her kneel as she drank slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she cupped the clear, cool water to her lips, and her eyes reflected a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering fear. For the first time in days, she felt a small measure of comfort, though the memories of her suffering were never far from her mind. The cowboy watched her carefully, noting every reaction. Her bruises were dark and swollen, and her broken bones caused her to flinch at every movement. He had done what he could to ease her pain, but real healing would require a doctor or someone with proper knowledge. Still, he knew that rest, water, and food would strengthen her enough to survive long enough to reach help. He took a seat under the shade of a tree, keeping his eyes on the surroundings while giving her a chance to recover. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable, broken only by the soft ripple of the stream and the distant calls of birds. The desert that had seemed endless and unforgiving just hours before now felt slightly less oppressive. Here, in this small oasis, life existed in the midst of hardship. The cowboy realized that survival was not only about moving forward, it was also about moments like this, when safety and calm could give the wounded a chance to heal and gather strength. Eventually the girl spoke, her voice faint but clear. I lost them," she said, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't specify who "them" was at first, but the pain in her tone was unmistakable. The cowboy sat closer, offering quiet support. "I know," he said softly. "I'm here now. You're not alone anymore." She looked at him, her eyes searching for the truth in his words. There was something in her gaze that said she wanted to believe him, even as fear and grief still held her tightly. Slowly, she began to share fragments of her story, the kind that had been too painful to speak aloud until now. "We lived in a small village," she whispered, her voice trembling. "At night, the raiders came. They killed everyone. I ran." Her words were broken and she had to pause often, but each fragment revealed a glimpse of the horror she had endured. The cowboy listened, his jaw tight with suppressed anger, but he said nothing. He knew that now was not the time for judgment or revenge. Now was the time to care for her, to protect her, and to let her trust that someone could help. She trembled as she spoke, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. I thought I wouldn't survive. The desert." Her voice cracked and tears spilled freely. The cowboy reached out, carefully brushing her hair from her face. "You did survive," he said firmly. "You're here, You're alive. That's proof of your strength. And I promise, I'll help you get through the rest." She looked at him, eyes wide, and for the first time, she seemed to truly believe that survival was possible. The cowboy began to consider their next steps. They needed more than water. They needed medical help, and they needed to move before the desert night fell. He scanned the horizon, noting landmarks and possible paths to the nearest settlement. He explained to her gently, "We have to keep moving soon. I know you're hurt, but we can't stay here too long. Night comes quickly in the desert, and it's dangerous to be caught out in the open." She nodded weakly, understanding the necessity even if her body protested. As they prepared to leave, the girl spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Why? Are you helping me?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. The cowboy paused, thinking of the countless hardships he had seen in life, the cruelty of the world, and yet the small acts of kindness that could make all the difference. "Because it's right," he said finally. "Because no one should be left to suffer alone. And because you deserve a chance to live. That's all the reason I need." She blinked, as if processing this new truth, and a small flicker of trust returned to her eyes. As they continued their journey, he noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She was still weak, still hurting, but there was a slight steadiness in her breathing and a hint of determination in her gaze. The cowboy knew that strength came in many forms. Physical, yes, but also emotional. She had endured loss, pain, and fear, yet she still clung to life. That was strength beyond measure, and it gave him renewed energy to guide her forward. During brief rests, she revealed more about her family and village. She spoke of her parents, her younger siblings, and the small, quiet moments of happiness they had shared before the attack. The cowboy listened intently, letting her speak at her own pace. Each story, though tinged with grief, gave a fuller picture of her life and the person she had been before tragedy struck. Through these stories, he began to see her not just as a wounded child in need of help, but as a person with memories, hopes, and the right to continue living. The cowboy also shared small stories of his own life, not to overshadow hers, but to show that life could continue despite hardships. He spoke of towns he had known, rivers he had crossed, and the small kindnesses he had experienced along the way. These stories seemed to comfort her, giving her a sense of normalcy and a reminder that there were still people who cared and places where she could be safe. As night approached again, the cowboy found another sheltered spot near a cluster of trees and rocks. He helped the girl down, adjusting the blanket around her to keep her warm. She shivered, and he held her gently, speaking softly to calm her. "I'll stay right here," he said. "No one can hurt you tonight. You're safe with me." She closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion take over. For the first time, she slept without fear of being discovered, of being attacked, of being left alone. During the night, the cowboy reflected on the choices he had made. He could have left her in the desert, turned away from a situation too dangerous to handle. But he hadn't. He had chosen compassion, courage, and responsibility. That choice was not without risk, but it was a choice he could live with. And as he watched over her, he realized that sometimes the right choice was not the easiest, but the one that gave another person a chance to survive. By morning, the girl had slept longer and more peacefully. She was still weak, but her breathing was steadier, and her small hands no longer trembled as much. The cowboy helped her back onto the horse, ready to continue their journey. The desert, though still harsh and unforgiving, now seemed slightly more manageable. They had faced another night together, and their bond had strengthened. The girl trusted him more, and he was even more determined to ensure her safety. As they rode, she began to share small details of her life before the attack, her favorite places in her village, her friends, and the quiet moments she cherished with her family. These memories were bittersweet, reminders of loss and grief, but also proof of her resilience. The cowboy listened quietly, knowing that sometimes the best support he could offer was simply to hear her, to validate her experiences, and to let her know that her past did not define her future. Throughout the day, the cowboy guided her carefully, moving slowly and deliberately. Every dune, every rocky path, every small animal that crossed their path was noted and navigated with caution. He spoke softly, offering encouragement and reassurance, while keeping a watchful eye on potential dangers. Their progress was slow but steady. The desert could be cruel, but together they had become a team, relying on trust, patience, and courage to navigate the harsh landscape. By late afternoon, they spotted signs of civilization in the distance, a faint trail, perhaps the path of travelers, or the edges of a small settlement. Hope filled the girl's eyes for the first time in days. "Do you think help is there?" she asked cautiously. The cowboy nodded. "I think so. We're close. Just a little further and you'll be safe." Her small smile, weak as it was, showed that hope was returning. She was beginning to believe that life could continue beyond the pain, beyond the desert, beyond the memories that haunted her. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the desert in deep oranges and reds, the cowboy felt a quiet satisfaction. They had survived another day together. The girl's strength had amazed him, and her trust in him had deepened. Yet, he also knew that challenges remained. The journey to safety was not yet over, and they would need courage, patience, and endurance to reach true security. But in that moment, hope existed, fragile, perhaps, but undeniable. The cowboy looked down at the girl, gently adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "We'll make it," he said quietly. "You'll see. You're stronger than you think, and we're almost there." She nodded, eyes bright with determination and gratitude. In that small, shared understanding, they continued their journey, united by trust, compassion, and the quiet determination to survive the desert together. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but in the distance, the faint outlines of buildings and fences signaled the promise of safety. The cowboy guided the horse carefully, keeping the Apache girl secure on the saddle. Her small hands clutched the blanket wrapped around her, and her eyes, though tired and still haunted by past horrors, glimmered with hope. After days of struggle, dehydration, and pain, they were finally approaching the place where help might be found. The closer they got, the more details emerged. A small settlement with wooden houses, a well, and a few travelers moving about. It was not a bustling town, but it was enough to provide water, rest, and the chance for the girl to receive care for her injuries. The cowboy kept his senses sharp, however. Even in what seemed like a safe place, danger could lurk. But he felt cautiously optimistic. After all, the presence of other people meant that survival was finally possible. As they entered the outskirts of the settlement, curious eyes followed them. Some townsfolk whispered among themselves, noting the unusual sight of a cowboy guiding a young wounded Apache girl through the dust and sun. The cowboy kept his focus forward, guiding her safely to a shaded spot near the well. He helped her down from the horse carefully, mindful of her broken limbs and bruised body. She winced but didn't cry out, a quiet testament to the endurance that had carried her through the desert. A few of the townspeople approached, wary but willing to help once they understood the situation. One woman, who had seen much hardship herself, offered blankets and water. The cowboy nodded in gratitude, keeping a protective eye on the girl. "She's hurt badly," he said. "She needs care and rest. Please take her slowly." The woman nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation, and gently helped the girl to a safe spot beneath the shade. The girl sat quietly, sipping water, her small body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The cowboy knelt beside her, speaking softly. "You made it," he said. "You're safe now. You don't have to fear the desert anymore." She looked at him with eyes full of trust, and a faint, exhausted smile appeared on her face. For the first time in days, she could allow herself to rest, to hope, to feel a small sense of security. As they waited for a doctor or someone with medical knowledge to arrive, the cowboy asked gently, "Do you want to tell me more about your family and your village?" She hesitated at first, the memories of loss and pain still sharp, but the warmth of safety and the presence of someone she trusted encouraged her to speak. She began to describe her village, her family, and the life she had known before the raiders had destroyed it. Each word was a mixture of sorrow and strength, a reflection of how much she had endured and survived. The cowboy listened without interruption. He realized that listening itself was part of healing. The girl's story was not just about tragedy, it was about resilience, courage, and the will to continue living despite overwhelming odds. Her words painted a vivid picture of life in her village, the people she loved, and the quiet moments of happiness she had treasured. In hearing her speak, the cowboy understood more deeply the person she was, and why protecting her mattered so much. Soon the town's doctor arrived, a kind and experienced man who quickly assessed the girl's injuries. The cowboy explained the situation, recounting the days they had traveled through the desert, her condition when he found her, and her current state. The doctor nodded gravely, understanding the seriousness of her injuries, but also impressed by her strength and endurance. "She's lucky to have survived this long," he said. "With care and patience, she can recover." The cowboy allowed himself a small sigh of relief. At last, the girl would have the proper help she needed. The doctor began to treat her injuries carefully, tending to her broken limbs, cleaning her bruises, and ensuring she was hydrated and nourished. The cowboy stayed nearby, offering quiet support. He knew that healing would be slow, that recovery would take time, but he also knew that she was finally on the path to safety. Each small improvement, the slight decrease in pain, the steadier breathing, the ability to sit a little more comfortably, was a victory. During the recovery, the girl began to open up more about the attack on her village. She described the raiders, their sudden violence, and the loss of her family. The cowboy listened, feeling anger rise, but he focused on providing calm and reassurance. Revenge could wait, if ever. It was her safety and healing that mattered most. She spoke of her fears, her loneliness, and the moments when she had thought she wouldn't survive. The cowboy encouraged her, reminding her of her courage and resilience, the very qualities that had allowed her to reach this point. As days passed, she regained strength. She could sit more comfortably, drink water without trembling, and even smile faintly. The cowboy remained nearby, checking on her regularly, ensuring she was safe, and offering gentle words of encouragement. Their bond had grown into something profound, mutual trust forged through hardship and shared struggle. She had learned to rely on him, and he had learned to admire her courage and determination. One afternoon, as the sun shone warmly over the settlement, the girl asked softly, "Will I ever see my village again?" The question was heavy, filled with longing and uncertainty. The cowboy thought carefully before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Some places may have changed forever, but I do know that you can live again. You can build a future even if it's different from the past, and you're not alone anymore." She nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was clear that she was beginning to accept the idea that life could continue beyond the pain she had suffered. The cowboy reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had found her alone and suffering in the desert, had carried her through danger, and had guided her to safety. It had been a test of endurance, courage, and compassion. Along the way, he had learned as much about himself as he had about her resilience. He realized that moments of compassion, simple acts of kindness, protection, and presence, could make an immense difference in someone's life. The girl, too, began to understand the value of trust. She had survived through fear and pain, learning to rely on someone other than herself for the first time in days. The cowboy's steady presence had given her hope, a sense of security, and the courage to face the future. She was not just recovering physically, she was beginning to heal emotionally, understanding that even in a world filled with suffering, there were still people who cared deeply about others. Over the following days, the girl grew stronger. She walked short distances with assistance, her limbs slowly regaining strength. The doctor monitored her progress carefully, noting each small improvement as a victory. The townspeople offered support as well, providing food, clothing, and encouragement. The cowboy stayed by her side, ensuring that she felt safe and valued. He knew that survival was more than just enduring physical challenges. It was about nurturing hope, trust, and resilience. Finally, the day came when the cowboy knew that she could begin to stand on her own, physically and emotionally. She walked a few steps with his guidance, her eyes shining with determination. The hardships of the desert and the trauma she had suffered were not forgotten, but she was no longer defined by them. She had survived, and she had begun to reclaim her life. As the sun set over the settlement, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, the cowboy reflected on the journey they had shared. He had faced the desert's harshness, the dangers of the journey, and the challenges of protecting a fragile life. But in return, he had witnessed something extraordinary. The courage of a young girl who refused to give up, the power of trust and compassion, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The girl looked at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and quiet determination. "Thank you," she whispered. It was simple, yet heartfelt, and it conveyed everything words could not fully express. The cowboy nodded, a small smile on his face. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You survived because you were strong. I only helped guide you. Remember that strength. It will carry you forward." In the days that followed, the girl continued to recover. She began to interact more with the townspeople, learning their ways and regaining confidence in herself. She shared stories of her past carefully, finding solace in the support and understanding of those around her. The cowboy watched from nearby, proud of her progress and confident that she could now face the future with resilience and hope. Though their journey had been filled with pain, fear, and uncertainty, it had also been a story of survival, trust, and compassion. The cowboy had given her the chance to live, but it was her own courage and determination that had carried her through. In the vast, harsh desert, they had discovered the power of human connection, the ability of one person to protect, guide, and inspire another, even in the most desperate of circumstances. As night fell and stars appeared above the settlement, the girl rested peacefully, her breathing steady and calm. The cowboy sat nearby, watching the sky and reflecting on the path that had led them here. The desert had been cruel and unforgiving, yet it had also shown them resilience, courage, and the enduring impact of compassion. They had both survived, and in the process had forged a bond that would remain in their hearts forever. For the first time since the journey began, the cowboy allowed himself to relax. The girl was safe, recovering, and beginning a new chapter in her life. The desert had tested them, pushed them to the edge, but it had not defeated them. Together they had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger. In that quiet moment, the cowboy realized that survival was not just about enduring the harshness of the desert or escaping danger. It was about the courage to care, the strength to endure, and the willingness to offer hope to someone who had lost everything. The girl's future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. And for now, that was enough.